Disney's Moana, Chapter 15. Dropping flat, Moana tried to cling to the crab's shell using the hook for a handhold, but as Tamatoa spun, she lost her grip and slid off, right into his waiting claw. Tamatoa lifted her up, peering at her with his beady obsidian eyes. The blue and purple crab was easily 50 feet tall, his front legs tapering into wicked curved points. Sticking up from his shell were all the petrified treasures he'd collected. Treasures, Moana was sure, that the crab protected viciously. "Yoo-hoo," the crab rumbled, his voice deep and rough, like he rarely used it. Clutched in his pincer, the jagged edge cutting into her waist and hanging in midair, Moana heard the scream echoing around the chamber before even realizing it was coming from her. "Argh!" "Mute that," Tamatoa said, bringing his other claw up to block her mouth. Her eye stalks bent lower to examine her, then circled around her. "Human, eh?" he said, watching her look around frantically as the air was forced out of her lungs by his claw. "Pick an eye, babe. It's rude to go back and forth." He flipped her over. "You're a long way from home, or not. I don't know where you live, do I? Except it's probably up there. Yeah, not down in the muck with the bottom feeders. That's what you call us, right? Bottom feeders?" Fear and shock were distracting Moana from Tamatoa's words. What was he talking about? Was he really concerned about what people thought of him? Thinking back, Moana realized Maui had referred to him as a bottom feeder. "Well, not with this shell, baby," Tamatoa shouted, baring his teeth in a yellow smile and pointing to his claw on his back. "Do you see all my sparkly treasures? All my glittery baubles? No one could call me a plain Jane." One of Tamatoa's eye stalks pivoted to admire his own shell, which was crammed with bright jewels and precious possessions. "Oh, you may have heard it's what's on the inside that counts, but don't believe it. Outer beauty brings real happiness." Despite all the shiny trinkets adhered to his shell, Tamatoa was clearly insecure. Moana tried to shake her head, but his claw was clutching her so tightly any movement hurt. "Not convinced, are you?" Tamatoa's eyes peered at her, and the crab looked annoyed. "But you were drawn to my shiny collection, weren't you? You see? Point proven. And yeah, that's a bit of an added bonus," Tamatoa continued, lifting her higher. "There are plenty of little parasites like you that are attracted by my sparkly shell. Dinner comes to me." "No!" Moana shouted, as Tamatoa flipped her up into the air, his mouth opening wide to catch her. This couldn't be happening. She had gone beyond the reef and found Maui and escaped the Kamakura, and even started to learn how to wayfind. How is she about to be crab food after all this? As she spun upside down, Moana saw Maui on top of Tamatoa's shell. Yanking his hook loose, Maui leapt up, wrapping one arm around her and holding her aloft as they fell to the floor so that his legs absorbed the impact. Setting her on the rocky floor, he shot her a quick smirk. Moana blinked up at him, speechless, as he hefted his magic fishhook, twirling it in one hand before smacking the flat side down in his other palm. "I'll take it from here," he said, his voice brimming with confidence. "It's Maui time!" With a glint in his eye, he turned to his tattoo self and asked, "What do you say, little buddy?" Mini Maui shifted, his ink reforming into the shape of a hawk, its claws outstretched as though ready to pounce. Giant hawk, coming up. Brandishing his hook at the crab, Maui let out a warrior yell. Chee-hoo! As Maui raised the hook above his head, it began to glow brighter and brighter with a brilliant yellow light. Tamatoa scuttled backward, his claws raised to shield his eyes. Moana's face lit up in amazement as the hook's power flowed over Maui's skin and he began to morph. He was shape-shifting. Silver scales gleamed and then a large fish flopped to the cave floor. Moana blinked in confusion. Hadn't he been planning on turning into a hawk? The fish squirmed, then zapped into a green bug, its wings whizzing rapidly as it buzzed off the stone. As she peered at the bug, it ballooned in midair and crashed down to land on 4 hooves. Staring up at her was a spotted pig. Its face crinkled cutely in puzzlement, reminding Moana a bit of Pooh. Shaking itself from snout to tail, it poofed back into Maui. The demigod tapped his fishhook, his eyebrows furrowed. Chee-hoo! Chee! He glanced up at Moana apologetically. This never happens to me. Chee-hoo! Come on! He muttered, shaking the hook harder, as though the magic just needed to be rattled loose. Thunk! An enormous blue leg punched into the ground next to them, making Moana jump. Moana and Maui looked up to find the giant crab looming over them again, a sinister smirk on his face. Missing your mana, Tamatoa rumbled. How embarrassing for you. Guess you're not as powerful as you used to be. With one mighty swing, Tamatoa knocked Maui into the air. The demigod flew across the cavern, smacking into the wall with a hideous thud before sliding to the floor. Stunned, Moana felt a surge of relief when Maui staggered to his feet, clearly injured but conscious. Although perhaps not for long. Tamatoa charged over, claws outstretched. The enormous crab lashed out at Maui in a series of powerful blows, flinging him from side to side. Stop it! Moana cried. Picking up a rock from the floor, she pitched it at the crab. Years of knocking fruit loose with stones had given Moana excellent aim, but even though she hit him square in the back of an eye stalk, Tamatoa ignored her. She bent for another stone. Before she could stand up, Tamatoa plucked her off the ground with his pincers and dropped her atop a pile of bones, the curved skeletons forming a wall around her. Straight in front of her, she spotted a crack in the cavern wall, the greenish hue of the sky shining through it. The fissure was small, but she could squeeze in, and Tamatoa wouldn't be able to follow her. Only... Moana glanced back. Tamatoa had Maui trapped, the jagged point of a leg pinning the demigod to the floor. As she watched, the crab plucked up the fishhook, turning it over and over. The great Maui. Without your hook, not so great. Tamatoa clicked the hook back in place among his collection. Maui struggled, trying to lift his head. Admiring the shell? You know, in some ways it was inspired by all your tattoos. I just happen to like my artwork, well, shinier. Too bad yours can't help you now. Pushing his claw into Maui's back, Tamatoa pierced a tattoo Moana had never noticed, since it was usually hidden by Maui's hair. It showed a woman and a baby, and while Moana had no idea what great feat it depicted, it was obvious that Tamatoa pressing on it was agonizing for Maui. He grimaced in pain and wriggled, trying to break free. "You're always trying so hard to be loved, but no matter what you do for the humans, it will never be enough to fill that void inside you. Don't you know the secret, old friend? You really have to start by loving yourself, Maui. And for that, you really have to be beautiful, I hate to say." Casually, Tamatoa let Maui up, then swiped his claw against him, sending Maui crashing against the wall. "Just like me, I love every shiny thing about myself," Tamatoa gloated as he picked Maui up. The demigod's eyes bulged as his chest was squeezed. That did it. Moana leapt to her feet and wriggled out between the ribs of the fish skeleton, a plan in her head. "I have something shiny," she shouted, holding up the spiral-engraved stone. Tamatoa's jaw dropped as he spotted her treasure. "The heart of Tafiti," he said, his voice awestruck. Dropping Moana unceremoniously, he pounded across the cavern, his claws twitching as though they were itching to cradle the stone. The entire floor trembled from the force of the crab's charge, and Moana slipped on the shifting surface. As she tumbled to the ground, the circular stone she held went flying, bouncing and rolling along the floor straight toward a deep crevice. Everyone seemed to inhale as the stone wavered on the edge before dropping into the darkness.